This is presented by Rachel Meryment of HACCP International. Rachel is a food technologist with an MBA and a passion about food safety.
Welcome to today's session. Nice to see you all. Today I'm going to go through, is that right? Okay. Today I'm going to go through um, food safety requirements, HACCP, what that's all about from a food safety perspective in a food organisation, and HACCP International, the company I work for, and what we do in certifying non-food products. We've seen lots of electronic and digital systems become more and more prominent in the food industry in recent years. So I'm going to talk about a bit of a history and what to look for and the benefits and pitfalls. And at the end of the session, we'll have some time for questions. So don't be shy. So food safety is important for us, is important because when we go out to eat food products from a restaurant or food products we buy from the supermarket, we don't expect to get sick or injured. So safe food is food that does not make anybody ill. The World Health Organization estimates around 600 million people in the world suffer from food illness or contaminated food every year, and 425,000 people die. So it's pretty massive numbers globally. But in Australia, the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand reported gastroenteritis has affected 4 million people. So 4 million people is still a lot of people to suffer from something that's preventable. So in our Food Standards Code is our requirements that we need to meet, and the Food Standards 3.2.2 is the requirements that set out what all food businesses need to meet to comply with to make sure that food is safe to be consumed. It specifies processes, controls, and the requirements that need to be satisfied at each step in the process. And some requirements relate to the receipt, storage, processing, packaging, distribution and disposal of food, and for food manufacturing, a recall process. So in December last year, the Food Standards Code was updated so that everybody needs to be able to be aware about their food safety requirements. And this writing is very small for me. It's a national food safety system, and all food businesses in Australia that are in food service, in catering and retail sectors need to have, or that sell unpackaged and potentially hazardous food, need to understand what requirements they have in place and what they need to meet. So generally they're caterers, restaurants, cafes, takeaway shops. And these businesses need to implement food safety supervisor and have food safety training. And depending on the category of product is depending on what extra requirements that they need to have. So the food safety supervisor, food safety handler training, and substantiation of critical food safety controls. So that is where there is evidence that food safety has been assessed and that the temperatures are under control, and that there's records to show that product being produced is always within those requirements. And there is further information on the Food Standards website. So depending on the category of business is depending on what requirements that people need to comply with. So a caterer or a food service business that produces unpackaged, potentially hazardous food, so that's something that's ready to eat straight away, and there's no further processing, so people pretty much eat it straight away, is a category 1 business. So they need to have a food safety supervisor that has been trained by a recognised or a registered training organisation, and they get the food safety supervisor certificate. Food handlers need to also have training, and there needs to be substantiation of critical safety control. So often that's temperature records. A category 2 type of company is a retailer that will sell ready to eat foods that are usually, or it can be unpackaged, but sometimes they might be like products that you buy at a service station that are ready to eat, but they're not actually making them on site. They need to have a food safety supervisor who's had the RTO training. They need to have food handler training, and there's many organisations that can do that if you do a Google search. And they don't need to have the substantiation of records. So that's the Food Standards Code side of things. Now we talk about what HACCP is a methodology of making food safe. So it stands for Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, and it is a process that food companies make to identify hazards that are microbiological, chemical, and physical hazards that might be present in their production process. It starts usually from receipt of raw materials, through storage, through processing, any storage that might be happening if people prep raw materials and then pop them into the fridge for storage. Those have to have control measures all the way through if they're identified as a critical control point, a CCP as we abbreviate it. So the Codex Alimentarius is the World Health Organization's food safety code, and that's where HACCP sits. And it also underpins many of the GFSI benchmarked food safety standards and quality standards that food manufacturers will be complying with and certified to. So it uses a risk assessment process, and the whole idea is to identify hazards, eliminate them if possible, or reduce them to an acceptable risk to ensure that food safety is under control. So I do have a little rocket on my screen here, and this is my nerdy fun fact that HACCP was designed in the 60s to prevent astronauts from getting sick in space. So it was developed with NASA and with Pillsbury's in America, and that methodology was determined to prevent problems from happening rather than checking product at the end of the production run and having potentially hazardous food go out to people. So, I don't know, it's my favourite fun fact actually. So a food safety program will have a HACCP system identifying the critical control points in manufacturing, but it's also supported by what we call support programs. So there's hygiene, which is your hand washing and your uniforms and making sure that personnel are working hygienically. There's vendor quality assurance, which is where you make sure that you're buying from reputable suppliers. So they may have a HACCP certified system, they might have a GFSI certified system, but you know that they're making products that are food safe. A cleaning and sanitation program, where that is what how often equipment is cleaned and that it's verified once it's sanitized. So how often does equipment get cleaned? How often does the flooring get cleaned? Are there records that it's proving that all of these processes have happened and that they're verified? For food manufacturing companies, they need to have a recall program, and if they don't have an actual recall, they need to do a mock recall every year to prove that if a problem does happen, that they know exactly where the product's been sold to so they can recall that. Pest control program is important for everybody to prevent pests from contaminating food products. And also training is important to make sure that everybody's staff are aware of food safety risks and that they're doing their jobs to the correct standard operating procedures. And internal auditing is another system to make sure that you do your own checks and balances to make sure that you're following your own systems and you can identify any gaps that might be there for continuous improvement. So the GFSI standards also look at quality attributes. So I do have to mention that HACCP is only looking at food safety. So it can be a product that is food safe, but it could have terrible quality and not be consistent. And that would actually pass a HACCP system because it's all about food safety. So often food companies will add in quality parameters to make sure that they have got that consistency in place. And the GFSI standards also look at food fraud and tamper evident packaging and their packaging and labelling, and they have additional systems in place for those. So when food companies are choosing what products and equipment that they use to make their food, they do need to ensure that they are fit for purpose and that they're not going to introduce any unintended food safety risks, and that it must be compatible with the type of food safety system that they're operating. So HACCP International, which is a company I work for, we are an accredited product certification company, and we have offices in Europe, in the UK, in Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, in North America, and our head office is in Sydney in Australia. We certify food safe properties of non-food materials, equipment and services that are used in the food industry. And we are food safety experts, and we all have a food technology background and have worked in the food industry. We use the HACCP methodology, so it is a risk assessment process that we look at how the product is made, and we assess whether that's going to bring any unintended food safety risks of that product. And we have around 70 different categories. So we look at temperature monitoring and recording devices. We look at digital software for HACCP systems. We look at hand towels and their dispensers, soaps, sanitizers, pest control, equipment, and chemicals, and services and lighting, and so many more. And we do have a register of certified products on our website. So if you are looking for a certified product, that's the best place to go to. So we have around 10 key criteria in which we assess products. And at the end of the assessment, we give them a food zone classification. And so sometimes people will ring me and say, hey, I want a food zone primary classification because they think that's the best. But that is only going to be awarded to something that is indirect food contact. So that would be like a disposable glove or a temperature probe, piping bags or utensils that do come in direct contact with food. Food zone secondary products are those that are suitable for touching food surfaces, but are not expected to touch the food themselves. So they're things like cleaning cloths and scourer pads and hard surface sanitizers. Splash and spill zone are items that are used in the food area. And so a lot of equipment and lighting and flooring come under that category. And non-food zone items are those that are used in and around food, but are not necessarily in a food production area. So that might be rodenticides used for controlling pests outside the factory, or even software systems, which we're going to talk a bit more about today. So just to be clear, that a HACCP versus a HACCP International certification are quite different. So food companies will have a HACCP certification system, which is about how they make their food products. So the food facility will have a food safety program in place. They will have done their hazard analysis on their chemical, physical, microbiological and allergen hazards at each step in the process. They'll do a risk assessment to determine the likelihood of that happening and the severity if it does happen, and put critical control points in place to manage those hazards. The certification is of the food business and the process of how it makes food. And often it's called a HACCP program or a HACCP system, and it covers from raw material, ingredients, processing, training, storage and delivery. And within that system, often when they're being audited by their food safety auditors, they need to show that the products and equipment that they're using are fit for purpose. And that's where HACCP International certification comes in. So we don't do management systems in HACCP International. We look at the product. We look at what it's made from, the materials of composition. We look at the instructions for use. And we look at, we've got 10 key requirements that do depend on what that product is. So if it's in direct food contact, we require migration test reports to make sure that it's not going to leach out any bad products or anything hazardous from a chemical perspective. We look at what claims are being made, and if they're about it kills 99% of germs, we need to see the microbiological analysis to back up those claims. If it's a sanitizer, we do have sanitizer standards that they need to make, and that is demonstrating a log reduction in bacteria of key food poisoning bacteria. So there's lots of evaluation that does go on behind our certification. But it does mean that a food company can be assured that those products that they're buying that are HACCP International certified will be fit for purpose. So we have seen lots of different types of electronic and digital systems, and those include data loggers and temperature control and monitoring devices, or humidity control. We then moved into integrated temperature monitoring and recording instruments and analytical measurement such as pH meters and hydrometers, and inventory date marking apps and label machines, and HACCP food safety software systems. So I thought we'd have a little walk down memory lane and see about where we've come from. So in the 50s, we had these analog chart recorders. And so when I first was working in manufacturing, we had a sauce production room, and this was the evidence that the production crew had to show that those products were being pasteurised at the right temperatures. And they would have to do their line checks every half an hour and submit this at the end of shift, and our quality team would have to make sure they were in specification. And then in the 60s, so I didn't realise that that was 1950s technology, but it had been around a long time. In the 60s, batch controllers came about and data logging became available, but that was very expensive, and they had rooms full of computers, and so most of the manufacturers couldn't afford to have these fancy systems. In the 70s and 80s, data loggers became smaller and more compact, and they had probes connected with wires, and they could store data in a chip or in like an SD card, remember those? And then you'd put that into the computer, and then you'd download and do your analytics. And then the 90s, the data loggers became a lot more popular and used in transportation of cold products, and software were improved, and we were able to do better reporting. Then we come along to the 2000s, and we had infrared thermometers and wireless technologies that came in place. And Wi-Fi and Bluetooth could transmit from receivers in cold rooms and give us more data in real time. And then in the 2000s, we became cloud storage, software as a service, and the Internet of Things. And more digital food safety programs have become available. And that has really made a big difference for food companies with being able to have data and real-time alerts. So in what we look for, we look at hardware and we look at the software systems, but we look at the materials of composition, at what the housing and the wires and the probes look like, because we want to make sure those won't bring in any contamination problems. We look at what it's made from a toxicity perspective, and particularly the design. If it's going to be in a food handling area, we need to make sure that it's easy to be cleaned. So when you're looking at any probes, they need to not have too many cracks and crevices so that you don't have a build-up of food product that might then cause a growth of mold or other bacteria. We look at operating instructions, and that's really important to make sure that the controls and the information that people are providing their customers is going to make sure when it's easy to use, it's easy to follow, and when people follow those instructions, that it is producing food safe products. And we look at consequence of error. So for temperature monitoring devices particularly, we look at the operation of the ranges in temperature and the accuracy and how they're calibrated. So it's important that people know upfront how they're needing to be calibrated, because it's not much point having great results if they're inaccurate and they're actually not, in actually being food safe temperature requirements of under 5 degrees Celsius if it's a refrigerated product. So infrared models, we do have a requirement that they have calibration instructions to be compared to a probe thermometer, and that any errors are noted. So any claims about products we verify, as I mentioned before, and operating instructions and marketing materials are used, and all of the products that we certify need to have a contribution to food safety. So temperature probes can be a vector for cross-contamination if they're not cleaned and sanitized between measurements. So we make sure that this is included in the operating instructions. And we know that food safety programs in food companies have got procedures to make sure that there are prevention of cross-contamination, but we also need to make sure that that's noted in the instruction manual. So when buying temperature monitoring devices, we make sure that, or we recommend that you make sure that the housing is smooth and easy to clean, that the design of it and the probe or the sensors are easy to clean as well, that the calibration instructions are easy to follow, and that it can be calibrated. So some can be calibrated by a third party, and that might be after sales or servicing, or it might be a third party certifier. And some can be adjusted manually by the user and using the ice, slurry and water or boiling water methods. And those methods can be often found on like Vic Health or Queensland Health or New South Wales Food Authority websites, and they're very easy to follow. Also, the location of where the screen is or where the information is found is also important, because you don't want to have the screen halfway down if you want to look at it from the top. So just little design features to look for is what we recommend. And if it does have software, what software updates and how frequently, and how are you notified about those? So in a HACCP system, as I've mentioned, we look for microbiological, physical, chemical and allergens, and there has to be a hazard analysis process. So food companies that are certified to a HACCP program, the auditors want to look at all of this. So in past times, there's been loads of papers, and my colleagues who are food safety auditors are like, oh my gosh, that audit took so long, which incidentally costs the food company more money because the food safety auditors are there for longer. They didn't have their records in order, they couldn't find this, they couldn't find that, whereas digital systems have them all in one place. And there's no need for archiving in the paper sense because they're already in that system. And depending on that system that you're looking for, it's best practice to have policies and procedures on that HACCP system, on the software system, to eliminate the need for paper SOPs, and also to have monitoring forms and records that then supersede the need for paper records and archiving, as I mentioned. So these are all the benefits of digital systems. They can be time saving, and there is accountability. So it is important that when you are looking at buying a digital food safety system, that you know how it's operating and you know how to retrieve the records. So one of my food safety auditor colleagues was saying the other day that she was at an audit and she asked to see some standard operating procedures, but the people didn't know how to access those on the system because they mostly just look at the records. And so it's very important that you know how the whole system works. And Also that the accountability factor is that it's time stamped and it's user stamped, so you know who's entered that data. And also, if that system allows changes to be made, that there is a date stamp and you can see what it was originally, because that will be a red flag for the auditor when they come in and they'll go, why has that changed? What was it before? And if that was out of specification, they will want to know why it was out of specification, what has happened to that product, what has happened to the process. Have you done training? Have you got a corrective action in place to make sure that that one error hasn't happened again? So accountability is super important. And record management. So the auditors will want to be able to ask you for specific equipment or for time zones or time frames, and they will want you to be able to retrieve data from a cross section of different times and different equipment to verify that the system is operating correctly. But the best benefit, I think, is no more archiving with all of that paper. And alerts for routine maintenance reminders is a good thing, but also alerts for if it's product that is, say, a temperature measurement and the product is out of specification. Alerts in real time is a real benefit. And some software systems that we've seen just alert, others alert, and you can't turn it off until you've entered some text to say what have you done with the problem, and that the food safety auditors really love, because then they understand that that process is in control. And yeah, everything is in one place. It's very easy to access and it's innovative. So we really love the innovation, and we like seeing new things in HACCP International. So some of the pitfalls is like, make sure you get all the features that you are looking for, and that you do have backups and you know how to access those backups, particularly if they're in the cloud system. Access for user logins. We recommend it's best practice to have individual user logins, so then there's that accountability and you know who has accessed and entered that information at that point in time. Data security for external access is really important. And also data integrity. So as I mentioned, the data that can be changed, is there a log of that? And free text to be able to identify non-conformities. So if there's not opportunity to have free text, we think that could be a problem. And if there are alerts, what do they do? Who do they go to even? It's not much point if they have an alert and no one knows about it. And corrective actions that need to be notified. So when we're assessing food safety software systems, we look at what the operator level user gets to see. We look at the data. Is it entered with a date stamp? And does that include the time and the user? We then look at the supervisor level access to make sure that the records are there and signed off, and we want to know what the supervisor can see. And we want to know the alert system and who it goes to, and non-compliance management. And not all systems have a non-compliance management, but if it does, we want to know what is in scope of that software, if data can be altered, and what reports can be accessed, and can the dates be all different? Is it by date, equipment and user? And what data can you export, and what formats can it be exported into? And who sets up the system? Is it something that you need to get the supplier back to do every time you make a change or you add a new product range? Or is that something that you can do yourself as the customer? So just things to note when looking for these safety software systems. And how is it amended and updated? So that's basically the end of my presentation. And wondering if anyone has any questions. Easy peasy. If you do have any questions about food safety or anything like that, you can email HACCP Australia at info@haccp.com.au, and we're very happy to help answer any food safety questions people may have. And I'll be walking around if you want to ask me any questions as I walk around. Oh, you have a question. Excellent.
Do you recommend any of the food safety softwares?
We do have some food safety software that we have certified, and they are listed on our register of certified products on our website.
With the package, with the devices, or is it
Some
just the
do, some don't. We've got there's a range of different things. So it does depend on what you look for. There are some with probes that will take temperature measurements and then go into a system, and there are some that you have your own probes that you have. There's a few different ranges on there. Yep.
Hi, thanks Rachel. That was a great presentation, very simple, and you touched on the key elements. I have to, full disclosure, I run a food safety software management system business. I think it was really a comment more than anything, was that whether it's a paper system or whether it's a digital system, the key point is that there needs to be a management-led food safety culture that really embodies citizenship within the team, so that they are aware of obviously the critical importance of food safety in the business and specifically in their job. The other comment that I would make is the transition from paper to digital is actually can be quite a significant change for businesses, and it's one that can obviously highlight unknown inadequacies in their paper system, because there's a lot of transparency that then comes with digital. And final comment is really, I think a system needs to be able to align with the operator's process in a very simple manner, because ultimately it's around efficiency and making the job easier for people on the floor. So, it's not something that just is a digital form that's replicating what was on paper where you have to fill in boxes. It's something that needs to be just something that they do along with their standard, work.
And that was the intention of the paper thing, but it turned out to be, this is a bit onerous, whereas when things are integrated
yes.
it really does help with efficiencies. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and the traceability you mentioned is a key point with any digital system, is that, the user, the date, the time, etc. So that's it for me.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Rachel, that was great. I'm just wondering, from the point of view of a manufacturer, do you go to their factory and test, or do they have to bring it to you?
From equipment, it depends on the size and what the product is. So if it's a temperature probe that's quite small, that will get shipped to us. But if we're going to see 15 lights, we go to them.
Okay. My last question is, if I have a food premises and products need to be tested, do you come out and do the analysis, or have a team that does that for you?
For a HACCP management system, we have a team of auditors that do the food safety auditing at their premises.
Okay.
All good. Thanks so much, everybody.